In Regency London, the Duke of Harrington forces Beatrice Ventri to waltz, intending to expose her lies and crush her reputation. Instead, she dances with unexpected brilliance, walking away from society's expectations forever. What happens when a woman transforms her moment of greatest humiliation into the first step of her liberation? The sun cast golden light through tall windows in Lady Pembroke's ballroom. Beatrice Ventri stood near a white marble column, her back straight as a ruler. She wore a cream-coloured dress that shimmered when she moved. Her brown hair was pulled up with tiny white flowers woven through the curls. 22 silver candles in each of the 4 chandeliers made the room glow like magic. Beatrice's mother had spent 3 hours that morning making sure every part of her look was perfect. Stand tall, smile small, and speak only when asked a direct question, her mother had told her for the 100th time as they rode in their carriage to the ball. Beatrice nodded as she always did. She knew the rules by heart. A proper young lady never laughed too loudly. She never ate more than a few small bites at dinner. She never shared her true thoughts on books or politics. She never danced with the same gentleman twice unless he was a close relative or her future husband. Beatrice watched the dancers spin across the shiny wood floor. The music from the 5-man orchestra floated through the air like a sweet smell. Ladies in pretty dresses twirled like colourful flowers in a garden. Men in black suits and white gloves led them around the floor. "Miss Ventri, you look lovely tonight," said Lady Pembroke as she stopped beside Beatrice. "The Duke of Harrington has asked about you twice this evening." Beatrice felt her heart beat faster. The Duke was the most important unmarried man in London this season. He was 30 years old, rich, handsome, and from one of the oldest families in England. Every mother with a daughter to marry off wanted him to notice their child. "Thank you for telling me, Lady Pembroke," Beatrice said with a small bow of her head. As Lady Pembroke walked away, Beatrice's friend Mary rushed over, her pink cheeks showing her excitement. "Did I hear her mention the Duke? Oh, Beatrice, he's looking at you right now." Beatrice didn't turn to look. That would be too forward. But she felt his eyes on her from across the room. "Mother says he's looking for a wife this season," Mary whispered. "Everyone knows he needs to marry soon. His uncle is sick. And he needs an heir." Beatrice nodded but kept her face calm. Inside, her mind raced with hopes and dreams. If the Duke chose her, she would be one of the most important ladies in England. Her children would be part of a great family line that went back hundreds of years. Her mother would finally be happy with her. "Miss Ventri," a deep voice broke into her thoughts. Beatrice turned slowly and dropped into a perfect curtsy. "Your Grace." The Duke of Harrington stood before her, tall and proud. His dark hair was cut short in the latest style. His blue eyes were cool as they looked down at her. "Would you do me the honour of joining me for the next dance?" he asked. "It would be my pleasure," Beatrice said, placing her hand on his arm. As he led her to the dance floor, she felt every eye in the room watching them. This was the moment her mother had trained her for since she was old enough to walk. The Duke wasn't a warm man, his smile didn't reach his eyes. But he was proper and perfect in every way that mattered to society. As they danced, he asked about her family, her education, and her interests. Beatrice gave the answers she knew were right. "I enjoy needlework and watercolours," she said, "and I find great joy in playing simple songs on the pianoforte." She didn't tell him about the books she read in secret, stories of adventure and far-off places. She didn't mention how she loved to run through fields when no one was watching, or how she sometimes made up wild stories in her head. After their dance, the Duke walked her back to her mother. "Miss Ventri dances beautifully," he told her mother. "Like a proper English rose." Beatrice's mother beamed with pride. "We are honoured by your kind words, Your Grace." When the Duke walked away, her mother squeezed her arm hard. "You've done well. He's shown clear interest. This could be the match we've worked for." For the rest of the evening, Beatrice felt like she was floating above the floor. She spoke with other young ladies who now looked at her with new respect and a bit of jealousy. The Duke had singled her out among all the eligible young women. As the night grew late, Beatrice stood with her mother near the punch table. The Duke approached them once more. "Mrs. Ventri, might I call on your daughter tomorrow afternoon?" he asked. "We would be delighted, Your Grace," her mother replied. "Shall we expect you at 3 o'clock?" The Duke nodded. "Until tomorrow." Then, when their carriage rolled home that night, Beatrice's mother couldn't stop smiling. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The Duke is the greatest match in England. Think of the life you'll have. The finest houses, the best parties, children with noble blood. Beatrice looked out the carriage window at the dark London streets. Yes, mother, it's what we've always wanted. But as she spoke the words, a strange feeling grew in her chest. Like a small bird trapped in a cage, something inside her fluttered with worry. This perfect life her mother described, was it truly what she wanted? Or was it what she had been told to want for so long that she couldn't tell the difference anymore? In her bedroom that night, Beatrice stood by the window and looked up at the few stars she could see through London's smoky air. The Duke would make her a duchess. Everyone said she should be grateful and happy. This was the dream. This was success. So why did her heart feel heavy as a stone? Why did she have a strange feeling that something wasn't right? Don't be silly, she whispered to herself. This is your chance to make mother proud. This is what a proper young lady hopes for. Beatrice climbed into her bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow the Duke would call. Tomorrow her future would begin to take shape. Tomorrow she would take another step toward becoming exactly the person everyone expected her to be. 3 weeks passed like a happy dream for Beatrice. The Duke called at their home 5 times. He sent flowers twice and once brought a small silver box with candy. Everyone in London now knew that Beatrice Ventri had caught the eye of the most wanted man in society. Other mothers looked at her with envy. Other young ladies whispered behind their fans when she walked by. "He will ask for your hand soon," Beatrice's mother said as she helped her dress for Lady Harrington's grand ball. This ball was the biggest event of the season. Over 200 people would be there, all the most important families in England. Beatrice wore her best dress, a pale blue silk that made her eyes look like the sky on a clear day. Her mother placed her grandmother's pearls around her neck and pinned tiny silver stars in her hair. "You look perfect," her mother said. "Tonight could be the night he asked your father for your hand." The Harrington house was the grandest in London. It had 50 rooms and gardens that went on for acres. 100 footmen in matching red coats stood in a line as guests arrived. The ballroom was 3 times bigger than any Beatrice had ever seen. Golden light from 1,000 candles made the room bright as day. Music from a 20-person orchestra filled the air. The smell of roses and lilies from huge flower displays mixed with the scent of expensive perfumes. "Miss Ventri, you look lovely tonight," the Duke said when he found her near the punch table. "Would you honour me with the first dance?" Beatrice felt everyone watching as the Duke led her to the centre of the floor. This was what she had hoped for, what her mother had planned for her whole life. The music started and they began to dance. The Duke held her hand a bit tighter than needed, but his steps were perfect. Beatrice followed his lead, counting in her head as her dance teacher had taught her. As they moved around the floor, the Duke asked about her week, and Beatrice gave the answers she knew were right. She talked about the weather, about the book of poems her mother let her read, about the new dress she was having made. She was careful to sound smart, but not too smart, funny, but not too funny, sweet, but not boring. "Tell me, Miss Ventri," the Duke said suddenly, "did you enjoy your time in Vienna last winter? I've heard you speak quite fondly of it." Beatrice felt her heart skip a beat. She had never been to Vienna. She had never left England. But last week, at a dinner party, she had overheard the Duke talking about how much he loved Vienna and its music and dances. Without thinking, she had joined the conversation and said, "Oh yes, Vienna's music is unmatched. The waltzes I learned there were so beautiful." It was a small lie, told to impress him. She didn't think he would remember or ask about it. "Vienna," she said now, her voice shaking a little. "Yes, it was. Lovely." The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "The Imperial Palace is something to behold, is it not? Those magnificent gold rooms." Beatrice had no idea what the palace looked like. She had only seen pictures of Vienna in books. "Yes, truly amazing," she said, hoping he would change the subject. But the Duke was not finished. "And did you attend the Emperor's ball while you were there? I'm told it's quite the spectacle." Beatrice could feel sweat on the back of her neck despite the cool air in the room. We were not able to attend. My aunt was feeling unwell that evening." The music ended, and Beatrice thought the questioning would stop. But instead of leading her back to her mother, the Duke kept hold of her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, in a loud voice that made everyone turn to look, "Miss Ventri has just reminded me of her time in Vienna, where she learned the most beautiful waltzes. Perhaps she would honour us by demonstrating the Viennese waltz she spoke so passionately about at Lady Hartley's dinner. The room fell silent. Beatrice could feel her face burning red. She looked around desperately for her mother but couldn't find her in the crowd. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly," she started to say, but the Duke cut her off. "Nonsense! You described it with such detail. Surely you remember the steps." He turned to the orchestra. "A Viennese waltz, if you please. Something challenging." The music began, faster and more complex than any dance Beatrice had learned. The Duke pulled her close, his smile now cold and mean. "Now, Miss Ventri, show us what they taught you in Vienna," he whispered, so only she could hear. "A place you've never been, I suspect." Beatrice felt sick with fear. Everyone was watching. The Duke was leading her too fast, trying to make her stumble. He knew she had lied. He was trying to shame her in front of everyone. But then something strange happened inside Beatrice. A calm feeling replaced her fear. She remembered her old dance teacher, Madame Belmont, a French lady who had taught her in secret when her mother thought she was practicing the pianoforte. Madame Belmont had shown her all kinds of dances, including the waltz, which proper English families still thought was too wild and improper. "Feel the music in your body, not your head," Madame Belmont always said. "Let it move you." Beatrice closed her eyes for just a second. She took a deep breath. Then she began to dance as Madame Belmont had taught her. Her feet found the quick rhythm. Her body remembered the turns and spins. She moved with grace that surprised even herself. The Duke's face changed from mean pleasure to surprise. He had expected her to fail, to trip and fall, to run from the room in tears. Instead, she was dancing better than anyone had ever seen at an English ball. When the music ended, the room was silent for 3 long seconds. Then everyone began to clap and cheer. Everyone except the Duke, whose face was now red with anger. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" he demanded quietly as people crowded around them. Beatrice looked him straight in the eyes. "Not in Vienna, Your Grace. That was indeed a lie, told to impress you. I've never left England. But I did learn from a French dance teacher who once danced for the Emperor himself." She dropped into a perfect curtsy. "I may have lied about seeing Vienna, but I never lied about knowing how to dance." The Duke's face hardened like stone. "You made a fool of me," he hissed. "No one makes a fool of the Duke of Harrington." "No, Your Grace," Beatrice said, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "You tried to make a fool of me, but it seems neither of us got what we wanted tonight." With that, Beatrice turned and walked away from him. She could hear whispers all around her. Some people looked shocked, others impressed. Her mother appeared at her side, face white with worry. "What have you done?" her mother whispered. "The Duke looks furious. You've ruined everything." Beatrice picked up her shawl from a nearby chair. "I think it's time for us to leave, Mother." As they walked to the door, Beatrice could feel the Duke's angry eyes following her. She knew what this meant. There would be no proposal now. Her family would not join with one of the oldest names in England. Her mother's dreams for her were broken, yet as their carriage pulled away from the grand house, Beatrice felt something new inside her chest. Not sadness or shame, but something light and free, like a bird finally flying from its cage. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time she was curious to find out. The morning after the ball, Beatrice sat at the breakfast table alone. Her mother had not come down from her room. Her father was hiding behind his newspaper. No one had spoken more than 2 words to her since they returned home last night. The only sound in the dining room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the soft clink of Beatrice's spoon against her teacup. By noon, 3 letters had arrived. All 3 were from families cancelling plans they had made with the Ventris. By dinner time, there were 5 more. Beatrice watched her mother read each one with a face that grew more pinched and pale. 7 years, her mother said, her voice shaking. 7 years I spent preparing you for society, teaching you every proper way to sit, stand, speak, and dance. 7 years of planning, hoping, and working, all destroyed in one night. Beatrice looked down at her untouched plate. "I'm sorry, Mother. Sorry doesn't fix this. The Duke is furious. Lady Pembroke says he's telling everyone you tried to trick him. No respectable family will want anything to do with us now." 2 days passed, and no visitors came to the house. No invitations arrived. Beatrice's mother took to her bed with nerves. Her father spent all his time at his club, away from the disappointed faces of his wife and daughter. On the third day, Beatrice found a letter on the silver tray in the hallway. It was addressed to her in handwriting she didn't know. She opened it and read, "My dear niece, I've heard about what happened at the Harrington ball. Your mother's letter was full of worry, but I must say I'm rather proud of you. If you need a place to escape the gossip of London, my cottage in Cornwall is always open to you. The sea air might do you good. Your loving Aunt Josephine." Beatrice had met her aunt only twice. Aunt Josephine was her mother's older sister, but they were as different as sun and rain. While her mother chased society's approval, Aunt Josephine lived alone in a cottage by the sea, studied plants and stars, and didn't care what anyone thought of her. Beatrice's mother called her sister odd and disappointing, but the few times Beatrice had met her aunt, she had found her interesting and kind. That night at dinner, Beatrice gathered her courage and said, "I've had a letter from Aunt Josephine. She's invited me to stay with her in Cornwall." Her mother looked up sharply. "Josephine? Absolutely not. She's not a proper influence." "Mother," Beatrice said quietly, "no one in London will receive us now. Perhaps it would be better if I went away for a while." "Let the gossip die down." Her father lowered his newspaper. "She has a point, my dear. It might be best. Give people time to forget." 3 days later, Beatrice was in a carriage headed for Cornwall. Her mother had hardly said goodbye, still too hurt and angry to look at her daughter. Her father had given her a quick hug and slipped extra money into her hand. "It will blow over," he told her. "In 6 months people will have something new to talk about." The journey took 2 full days. Beatrice watched out the window as the crowded streets of London gave way to green fields, then rolling hills, and finally the wild, rocky coast of Cornwall. The air smelled different here, salty and fresh, without London's smoke and dirt. Aunt Josephine's cottage sat on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was small, only 6 rooms, but it had large windows that let in lots of light. Flowers grew in a wild garden around it, and a narrow path led down to a small beach below. "Beatrice, my dear," Aunt Josephine called, hurrying out to meet the carriage. She was 50 years old, with grey streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore a simple blue dress with no hoops or corsets, and her hair was tied back in a simple knot instead of the complicated styles London ladies wore. "Thank you for having me, Aunt," Beatrice said, suddenly shy. "Nonsense. I'm delighted. Come in. Come in. You must be tired after your journey." The inside of the cottage was nothing like Beatrice's home in London. Books covered every surface. Strange plants grew in pots on the windowsills. Maps and charts hung on the walls instead of family portraits. A large telescope stood by the biggest window pointing out toward the sea. "Your room is small, I'm afraid," Aunt Josephine said, showing Beatrice up a narrow staircase, "but the view makes up for it." The bedroom had a simple bed, a small desk, and a wardrobe. But the window looked out over the endless blue of the ocean, stretching as far as Beatrice could see. "It's perfect," she whispered, and meant it. That first night, Beatrice lay awake listening to the sound of waves crashing on the rocks below. It was so different from London's noises of carriages and people. She thought about the Duke, about her mother's disappointment, about the life she had thought was hers until 3 days ago. Tears filled her eyes and rolled down her cheeks, but she wasn't sure if they were tears of sadness or relief. The days began to take on a simple pattern. Beatrice woke with the sun. She helped her aunt in the garden, learning the names of plants she had never seen before. They walked on the beach collecting shells and strange stones. In the afternoons, Beatrice read books from her aunt's library, not just the proper poetry and novels her mother allowed, but books about science and history and far-off places. "Why do you have so many books?" Beatrice asked one rainy afternoon as they sat by the fire. Aunt Josephine smiled. "Because each one is a door to somewhere else. London society thinks women's minds are small, only big enough to hold gossip and household matters. But a woman's mind can hold the whole world, Beatrice. Mine does." A month passed, and Beatrice wrote dutiful letters home each week. Her mother's replies were short and cool. There was no talk yet of her return to London. "Do you miss it?" Aunt Josephine asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the cliff. The parties, the dresses, the attention, Beatrice thought for a long time before answering. "I miss who I thought I would become. The Duchess of Harrington, the perfect lady, the daughter my mother wanted. And who are you becoming now?" Beatrice looked out at the pink and gold sky reflected in the dark water. I don't know yet. In her second month at the cottage, Beatrice began to wake before her aunt. She would walk alone on the beach as the sun rose, watching seabirds dive for fish in the waves. Sometimes she stood with her arms out, face to the wind, feeling wild and free. No one was watching to tell her it wasn't proper. No one cared if her hair blew loose or her skirts got wet from the spray. One morning, she found a tidal pool among the rocks, filled with tiny sea creatures. She spent hours watching them, learning how they moved and lived. The next day, she brought paper and pencils to draw them. You have a good eye, Aunt Josephine said when Beatrice showed her the drawings. You see details others miss. Mother always said my drawings were messy, not delicate enough for a lady. Delicate things break easily, Beatrice. Better to be strong and true. 3 months into her stay, a bad storm hit the coast. Rain lashed against the windows. Wind howled around the cottage. Waves crashed higher than Beatrice had ever seen them. Will the cottage be safe? She asked, peering out at the dark clouds. It stood through 100 storms, Aunt Josephine said calmly. It will stand through this one too. That night, unable to sleep through the thunder, Beatrice lit a candle and found her way to her aunt's study. She pulled a book from the shelf, a book of star maps, and curled up in a chair to read. The storm raged outside, but inside, surrounded by books and knowledge, Beatrice felt strangely peaceful. In the morning, the storm had passed, but the beach below was changed. The sand had shifted. New rocks were visible. Old familiar paths were gone. That's how life works, Aunt Josephine said as they surveyed the changed landscape. Storms come, they change the shape of things, but the land remains. You remain, Beatrice, even when everything around you shifts. 4 months after leaving London, Beatrice stood at her bedroom window watching the sunrise. Her skin was darker from days in the sun. Her hands were stronger from working in the garden. Her mind was filled with new ideas from all the books she'd read. She no longer dreamed of ballrooms and the Duke's approval. Instead, she dreamed of distant shores she had read about, of stars whose names she now knew, of a life that belonged truly to her, not to society's expectations. A tear slipped down her cheek, not of sadness or shame, but of quiet wonder at the person she was slowly becoming. The old Beatrice was washing away like footprints on the beach at high tide. A new Beatrice was taking shape like the land after a storm, changed, stronger, ready for whatever might come next. Winter came to Cornwall, bringing short days and long nights. The wind blew harder, making the cottage windows rattle. The garden plants died back, waiting for spring. But inside Aunt Josephine's cottage there was always warmth and light. A fire burned in the hearth from dawn until bedtime. Candles glowed in every room. The smell of soup and fresh bread filled the kitchen. In London, winter is for balls and parties, Beatrice said one evening as she helped her aunt make dinner. Mother would be planning my dresses for the season now. And here, winter is for learning, Aunt Josephine replied. The perfect time to feed the mind when the body must stay indoors. Beatrice soon discovered her aunt was right. The long winter evenings became a time for study. Aunt Josephine's knowledge seemed as vast as the ocean outside their windows. She knew the Latin names of every plant that grew in their garden. She could name all the stars that sparkled in the night sky. She spoke French and Italian and even a little Greek. How did you learn all this? Beatrice asked one night as they sat by the fire. Outside, a storm was blowing, but inside they were cozy with warm blankets and hot tea. I had a choice to make when I was about your age, Aunt Josephine said. I could marry a man I didn't love and live the life society expected, or I could follow my curiosity. I chose curiosity. Didn't you ever regret it? Being alone? Aunt Josephine smiled. Who says I'm alone? I have friends who share my interests. I have my books. I have the sea and the stars. And now I have you. Beatrice thought about this as she fell asleep that night. The wind howled outside her window, but she felt safer than she ever had in her fancy bedroom in London. As winter deepened, Beatrice's education truly began. Each morning after breakfast, Aunt Josephine would say, "What shall we learn today?" Sometimes they studied languages, with Beatrice learning to read simple sentences in French. Sometimes they studied the stars using the big telescope on clear nights to look at the moon and planets. Sometimes they studied history, reading about ancient Rome and Greece. In London, Mother only let me read poetry and simple stories, Beatrice said. She said too much learning wasn't good for a young lady's mind or marriage prospects. Nonsense, said Aunt Josephine. A mind needs knowledge like a body needs food. Without it, it grows weak and sickly. One snowy afternoon, Beatrice found a locked chest in the attic. The key hung on a ribbon around Aunt Josephine's neck. What's in there? Beatrice asked. Aunt Josephine hesitated, then smiled. My past. Would you like to see? Inside the chest were treasures Beatrice had never imagined. Letters in many languages, sketches of plants from distant lands, maps with notes written in the margins, a small box of stones and shells from beaches around the world, and underneath it all, a beautiful blue dress, finer than any Beatrice had seen even in London. You travelled? Beatrice asked in wonder. But Mother said you never left Cornwall. Your mother doesn't know everything about me, Aunt Josephine said with a smile. When our father died, he left me enough money to live simply and to travel sometimes. I've been to France, Italy, Greece, and even Egypt once. Alone? But that's not proper for a lady. Proper. Aunt Josephine spoke the word like it tasted bad. I've found that proper is often just another word for fearful. Proper people are afraid to do anything differently than it's always been done. Beatrice carefully touched a dried flower pressed between the pages of an old journal. I thought I knew what my life would be. The perfect London lady. The Duke's wife. Now I don't know any more. That's the most exciting place to be, Aunt Josephine said, putting an arm around Beatrice's shoulders. When you don't know what comes next, anything is possible. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Beatrice spent more time with her aunt's books. She read about women who had done remarkable things, who had written books, made scientific discoveries, or travelled to far places. She read about the stars and planets, about the tiny creatures that lived in the sea, about the history of places she had never seen. Do you think I could travel someday? She asked her aunt one evening. See the places in these books. I think you can do anything you set your mind to, Beatrice. The question is, what do you want to do? Beatrice looked out the window. The first green shoots were appearing in the garden. New life after the long winter. I don't know yet, but I think I'd like to find out. Letters still came from London every few weeks. Her mother's were short and filled with gossip about people Beatrice barely remembered now. Her father's were longer and kinder. In his last letter, he had written, I hope you're finding some peace there by the sea. London society has a short memory, thank goodness. The scandal has mostly died down. Your mother speaks of your return for the summer season. Beatrice folded the letter and put it away. The thought of returning to London, to the life she had left behind, made her stomach feel tight and her breath come quick. She couldn't imagine going back to endless balls and shallow conversations, to being paraded before men in hopes of making a good match. You don't have to decide yet, Aunt Josephine said when Beatrice shared her worries. Spring is only beginning. As the days grew warmer, Beatrice spent more time outdoors. She helped her aunt in the garden, planting new seeds and watching the first flowers bloom. She walked on the beach, collecting interesting shells and stones. She sat on the cliffs and sketched the birds that nested in the rocks. One warm April day, a letter arrived from London. It was from Mary, Beatrice's old friend. Mary wrote that she was engaged to be married to a baron's son. It's not as grand a match as the Duke would have been, she wrote, but Mother is pleased. I do wish you were here to be my bridesmaid. Everyone misses you. The Duke has gone to his country estate and rarely comes to London now. People have almost forgotten about what happened. Won't you please come back for the summer season? It's so dull without you. Beatrice read the letter twice, then set it aside. Once, being Mary's bridesmaid would have been the height of excitement. Now it seemed like a story from someone else's life. That evening, Beatrice and her aunt walked along the cliff top as the sun set. The air was soft with spring, filled with the smell of new grass and wildflowers. Seabirds called as they flew back to their nests for the night. The ocean below was calm, reflecting the pink and gold of the sky. I had a letter from my friend Mary today, Beatrice said. She's getting married. She wants me to come back to London. And do you want to go? Beatrice stopped walking and looked out at the endless horizon where sea met sky. 6 months ago, she had arrived here broken-hearted and ashamed, certain her life was ruined. Now she stood taller. Her mind was full of new ideas. Her hands were stronger. Her heart was healing. "I don't think I belong there anymore," she said softly, "but I'm not sure I belong here forever either." Aunt Josephine nodded. "You don't have to know where you belong yet. You only need to know where you want to go next." As they turned to walk back to the cottage, a figure appeared on the path ahead of them. A man, well-dressed but dusty from travel, walking toward them with purpose. "Excuse me," he called in a voice with a slight accent. "I'm looking for Miss Josephine Ventri." "I am she," Aunt Josephine replied. "How may I help you?" The man bowed slightly. "Dr. Alessandro Moretti from the University of Bologna. I've come about your paper on coastal plant life. The Royal Society found it most impressive and suggested I consult with you while I'm in England." Aunt Josephine's eyes lit up. "How wonderful! I didn't expect a response so soon. This is my niece, Miss Beatrice Ventri." The visitor turned to Beatrice and bowed again. He was not young, perhaps 40, with streaks of grey in his dark hair. But his eyes were bright and curious, and when he smiled, his whole face changed. "Miss Ventri, a pleasure to meet you." "Dr. Moretti will be staying in the village," Aunt Josephine explained, "but I've invited him to work with me on cataloguing the spring plants. He's a professor of natural philosophy." As they walked back to the cottage together, Dr. Moretti and Aunt Josephine talked excitedly about plants and books and scientific ideas. Beatrice walked slightly behind them, watching. Here was her aunt, a woman society had dismissed as odd and useless, being treated with respect by a learned man from a famous university. Here was a different kind of life than the one Beatrice had been raised to want, a life of the mind, of discovery, of real conversation about important things. For the first time since leaving London, Beatrice felt a spark of excitement about the future, not the dull, proper future her mother had planned, where the best she could hope for was a good marriage, but a future where she might learn and grow and discover who she truly was and what she truly wanted. That night, as Beatrice got ready for bed, she looked at herself in the small mirror above her dresser. Her face was tanned from days in the sea air. Her hands were no longer soft and white, but strong and capable. Her eyes looked back at her with a clearness and purpose that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "I don't know who I'm becoming," she whispered to her reflection, "but I think I might like her." Spring brought new life to Cornwall. The garden around Aunt Josephine's cottage burst with colourful flowers. Birds built nests in the trees. The sea changed from dark winter grey to a bright, clear blue. Beatrice found herself waking earlier each morning, eager to see what new bloom had opened overnight or what interesting shells the tide had left on the beach. Dr. Moretti came to the cottage 3 times a week to work with Aunt Josephine. He brought books and papers and strange tools for studying plants. Beatrice watched from the corner of the room as they talked about things she only half understood. Sometimes they argued, but it was never mean or angry. It was the kind of argument where both people got excited about their ideas. "Would you like to join us today, Beatrice?" Aunt Josephine asked one sunny morning. "We're going to the tidal pools to collect samples." Beatrice had been about to go for her usual morning walk alone. She hesitated, suddenly shy. "I wouldn't want to be in the way." "Nonsense," Dr. Moretti said with a smile. "Another pair of eyes is always helpful. And your aunt tells me you have quite the talent for finding interesting specimens." So Beatrice found herself walking with them down the narrow path to the beach. She wore her simplest dress and sturdy boots. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon instead of arranged in the complicated styles she'd worn in London. The sun felt warm on her face, and the breeze carried the salty smell of the sea. At the tidal pools, Dr. Moretti showed Beatrice how to use a small glass to look more closely at tiny sea creatures. "See how this one moves? 5 tiny legs, each thinner than a piece of thread." Beatrice bent close, watching with wonder as the tiny star-shaped animal crawled over a rock. "It's beautiful," she said. "I never knew such small things could be so perfect." "The smallest things in nature often have the most perfect design," Dr. Moretti said. "Most people never bother to look closely enough to see them." They spent the whole morning by the tide pools. Beatrice helped collect samples in small glass jars. She held the notebook while Dr. Moretti made careful drawings. She asked questions that made both Dr. Moretti and her aunt smile and nod. "You have a good mind, Miss Ventri," Dr. Moretti said, as they walked back up the cliff path. "Your questions show you're thinking carefully about what you observe." Beatrice felt her face grow warm at the praise. In London, no one had ever complimented her mind. It was always her dress, her hair, her dancing, her manners, the things on the outside that everyone could see, never the thoughts inside her head. The next day, a letter arrived from Beatrice's mother. "The season is beginning," she wrote. "Your father and I expect you to return to London next week. Lady Pembroke is giving a small dinner party, and she has kindly agreed to include you. It's time to put this unfortunate business behind us and restore your place in society." Beatrice's hands shook as she read the letter twice more. She had known this day would come. 6 months had passed since she left London in shame, but somehow she had hoped for more time. "Bad news?" Aunt Josephine asked, seeing Beatrice's face. "Mother wants me to return to London next week. The season is starting. And do you want to go?" Beatrice looked out the window at the garden where spring flowers nodded in the breeze. "I don't know. I'm not the same person who left London. I don't think I can go back to being that girl again." "Then don't," Aunt Josephine said simply. "You don't have to be anyone but who you are now." That afternoon, Dr. Moretti came to the cottage with exciting news. "There's to be a lecture at the town hall tomorrow evening," he said. "A friend of mine from Cambridge is speaking about recent discoveries in astronomy. Would you both come as my guests?" Aunt Josephine clapped her hands. "How wonderful! Of course we'll come." Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't been in any kind of social gathering since the night of the ball 6 months ago. "Will there be many people there?" "Just a small group," Dr. Moretti assured her. "Mostly local scholars and a few interested townspeople. Nothing like a London ball, I'm afraid." Beatrice thought about her mother's letter. If she were going back to London next week, perhaps it would be good to practice being around people again. "I'd like to come," she said. The next evening, Beatrice dressed with care. She chose her simplest good dress, a light green one that her mother had always said was too plain. She pinned her hair up neatly but didn't try to copy the fancy London styles. Around her neck she wore a small pendant made from a pretty shell she had found on the beach. The town hall was a small stone building in the centre of the village. About 30 people were gathered inside, sitting on wooden benches. Some wore fine clothes, but others were dressed simply. No one stared at Beatrice or whispered behind their hands as she walked in with her aunt and Dr. Moretti. The speaker was a tall man with wild white hair and bright eyes. He talked about stars so far away that their light took years to reach Earth. He showed drawings of the moon's surface as seen through the biggest telescopes. He described comets that travelled through the sky and returned hundreds of years later. Beatrice listened with wonder. In London, the only public talks she had attended were poetry readings and music performances. Nothing like this, where someone shared knowledge just for the joy of it. After the talk, people gathered in small groups to discuss what they had heard. Beatrice stood quietly beside her aunt, not sure if she should speak to anyone. "What did you think of the lecture, Miss Ventri?" asked a woman with grey hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple brown dress and carried a notebook filled with writing. "It was fascinating," Beatrice said. "I've looked at stars through my aunt's telescope, but I never knew they were so far away." The woman smiled. "I'm Mrs. Grant. I teach at the girls' school in the next village. Perhaps you'd like to visit sometime? The girls would be thrilled to meet someone who has studied the stars." Beatrice blinked in surprise. "I haven't studied them, not really. I'm just learning." "We're all just learning," Mrs. Grant said with a laugh. "That's what makes it so wonderful." As they walked home under a sky full of stars, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in months. No one at the lecture had cared about her family name or her connection to the Duke. No one had judged her clothes or her manners. They had only cared about her thoughts and ideas. "Did you enjoy the evening?" Dr. Moretti asked as they reached the cottage gate. "Very much," Beatrice said. "It was nothing like the gatherings in London." "How so?" Beatrice thought for a moment. "In London, everyone is watching everyone else, judging clothes and manners and who talks to whom. Tonight felt more like everyone was looking up at the stars together, sharing the same wonder." Dr. Moretti smiled. "That's well said. The best gatherings of minds are those where we forget ourselves in our shared curiosity." The next day, Beatrice sat at the small desk in her room with 2 pieces of paper before her. On one, she began a letter to her mother. "Dear Mother, I've received your letter about returning to London. After careful thought," she stopped, not sure how to continue. On the second paper, she began a list of things she had learned in Cornwall. The names of 10 seabirds, how to grow herbs in a garden, the patterns of the tides, the constellations visible in each season, words in French and Italian, How to Bake Bread. As she wrote, she heard voices from the garden. Looking out her window, she saw Dr. Moretti showing Aunt Josephine something in a book. They were sitting on the bench under the apple tree, heads bent close together over the pages. Aunt Josephine laughed at something he said, and he looked at her with warm eyes. Beatrice thought about London, the crowded ballrooms, the careful conversations where no one said what they really thought, the constant worry about appearances. Then she thought about the lecture hall last night, the excitement of learning, the friendly welcome from Mrs. Grant, the way Dr. Moretti had introduced her to his colleagues as Miss Ventri, who has a keen eye for natural observation. She turned back to her letter to her mother and began to write again. After careful thought, I have decided to remain in Cornwall for the summer. I'm learning so much here that will make me a more accomplished person. Please give my love to Father. She knew her mother would be angry. There would be more letters, perhaps even a visit. But for now, Beatrice felt sure of her decision. That afternoon, she walked to the village alone to mail her letter. On the way back, she stopped at the bookshop. She had never been in a bookshop in London. Books had always been ordered for her by her governess or her mother, only proper books for a young lady. "May I help you, miss?" asked the shopkeeper, an older man with spectacles. Beatrice took a deep breath. "Do you have any books on astronomy, or perhaps natural philosophy?" The shopkeeper smiled. "Indeed I do. Right this way." Beatrice returned to the cottage with 3 books wrapped in brown paper. They were her first purchase with her own money, some of the extra funds her father had given her when she left London. That evening at dinner, she told Aunt Josephine and Dr. Moretti about her decision to stay. "I'm glad," Aunt Josephine said. "This place has been better with you in it." "And what do you plan to do with your summer?" Dr. Moretti asked. Beatrice thought about the books in her room, about Mrs. Grant's invitation to visit the girls' school, about all the things she still wanted to learn. "I'm not sure yet," she said, "but I think it might involve more lectures, more books, and more looking closely at small, perfect things that most people never notice." Dr. Moretti raised his glass in a toast. "To curiosity," he said. "The finest quality in a human mind." As they clinked their glasses together, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path. It wasn't the grand, glittering road to a duchess's coronet that her mother had planned. It was a smaller, quieter path, winding through gardens and tidal pools and starlit nights, but it was hers. Summer came to Cornwall in a burst of sunshine and colour. The days grew longer, stretching from early dawn until late evening. The garden around the cottage bloomed with roses in 10 different shades of pink and red. The sea turned a bright, clear blue that matched the cloudless sky above. Beatrice fell into a new pattern of days that felt nothing like her life in London. 3 mornings each week, she went with Dr. Moretti and Aunt Josephine to study the plants and animals along the shore. She learned to draw what she saw with careful detail. Her hands, once soft and white, grew strong and tanned. Her mind, once filled with gossip and fashion, now buzzed with questions and ideas. "You're becoming quite the naturalist," Dr. Moretti said one morning as they sat on rocks by a tidal pool. Beatrice was sketching a strange plant that clung to the rocks half in and half out of the water. "I'm only a beginner," Beatrice said. "There's so much I don't know yet." "That's the best part of learning," he replied. "There is always more to discover." Beatrice looked up from her drawing. Dr. Moretti was watching her with a kind smile. The sun lit up the silver in his dark hair. His eyes were the same blue-green as the sea behind him. Something fluttered in Beatrice's chest like the wings of the tiny butterflies she sometimes saw in the garden. "I've never met anyone like you before," she said suddenly, then felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. But Dr. Moretti didn't laugh or look away. "Nor are you, Miss Ventri," he said quietly. "You have a remarkable mind." 2 days later, Dr. Moretti invited Beatrice and her aunt to visit the village museum, where some of his scientific specimens were displayed. "It's small," he warned as they walked the mile into the village. "Nothing like the grand museums in London." The museum was just 3 rooms in an old stone building, but to Beatrice, it was as fascinating as any place she had ever been. Glass cases held shells and rocks and dried plants. On the walls hung maps of stars and oceans. In one corner stood a table with a microscope, where visitors could look at tiny things made large. "This is my favourite," Dr. Moretti said, leading Beatrice to a case near the back. Inside was a model of the solar system, with tiny painted balls showing the planets circling the sun. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, bending to look more closely. "I made it myself," he told her. "Each planet is exactly the right size compared to the others. Earth is this small blue one here." Beatrice looked at the tiny blue ball, then up at Dr. Moretti's face, so close to hers as they both bent over the case. "It makes you feel small, doesn't it? To think we live on just one tiny planet among so many." "Small, yes," he agreed, "but also connected to something vast and wonderful. Each tiny part of nature is connected to the whole, just as each person is connected to all others." After the museum, they walked to a small tea shop in the village square. It wasn't fancy like the tea shops in London. The tables were plain wood, not covered in fine cloths. The cups were thick pottery, not delicate china. But the tea was hot and sweet, and the cake was fresh from the oven. "I have news," Dr. Moretti said as they ate. "I've been invited to give a lecture at the Royal Society in London next month." "How wonderful!" Aunt Josephine exclaimed. "Will you go?" "I must," he said. "It's a great honour. I'll be speaking about the plant life here in Cornwall, including some of the specimens we've collected together." Beatrice felt a strange mix of feelings. She was happy for Dr. Moretti. She knew the Royal Society was important, but she also felt sad at the thought of him leaving, even for a short time. "Will you be gone long?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Just 2 weeks," he said. "But I was hoping, that is, I wondered if you might consider coming with me, Miss Ventri. Both of you," he added quickly, looking at Aunt Josephine. "Your knowledge would be invaluable, and perhaps Miss Ventri might want to visit her family briefly." Beatrice froze, her cup halfway to her lips. Go back to London? The very thought made her stomach tight with fear. What would people say? Would the Duke be there? Would everyone still remember her shame? "I don't think I'm ready," she said softly. Dr. Moretti nodded. "I understand. It was just a thought." That night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the moon's path across the dark sea. The thought of returning to London filled her with dread. But the thought of Dr. Moretti going without her made her equally sad. Over the next week, Dr. Moretti came to the cottage every day. He and Beatrice took long walks along the cliff tops, talking about science and books and ideas. They sat in the garden with Aunt Josephine, drinking tea and watching butterflies dance among the flowers. They worked together in Aunt Josephine's study, organising notes and specimens. One evening, as the sun was setting, Dr. Moretti asked Beatrice to walk with him down to the beach. The tide was out, leaving a wide stretch of wet sand that reflected the pink and gold sky. Their footprints made a trail behind them as they walked in silence for a while. "I leave for London in 3 days," Dr. Moretti finally said. "I know," Beatrice replied. "Your lecture will be wonderful." "I'm sure of it." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Ventri, Beatrice, there's something I must tell you." Beatrice's heart beat faster. "Yes?" "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your mind open like a flower to the sun, it has been the greatest joy of my life." Beatrice felt her face grow warm, but she didn't look away from his earnest gaze. "When I first came here, I thought only to study plants and write papers," he continued. "I never expected to find someone like you, someone who sees the world with such fresh eyes, who asks such thoughtful questions, who finds beauty in the smallest details of nature." He took her hand gently in his. "I care for you deeply, Beatrice, more than I thought possible, and I believe, I hope, you might feel something for me as well." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his strong and tanned from years of work outdoors, hers now almost matching after months in Cornwall. "I do," she whispered, "but I'm afraid." "Of what?" She looked up at his kind face. "Of everything. Of feeling too much. Of being hurt. Of what people would say. You're so much older, and You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known," he said simply. Beatrice thought of all the changes in her life since coming to Cornwall. How she had learned to think for herself, to see beauty in unexpected places, to value knowledge over appearance, and how much of that change had happened because of the man standing before her, looking at her not as a pretty ornament for a ballroom, but as a person with a mind and heart of her own. "I care for you too," she said at last, "more than I know how to say." The smile that lit up his face was like sunrise. Gently he raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Then will you consider coming to London? not for your family or for society, but for yourself. To see the museums and libraries, to hear lectures at the Royal Society, to meet other women who study nature and the stars. Beatrice took a deep breath. The thought of London still frightened her, but the thought of experiencing it in a new way, with Dr. Moretti beside her, seeing things she had never been allowed to see before, that was exciting. "I'll think about it," she promised. The next day, Beatrice talked with her aunt for a long time. "Do you think I should go?" she asked. Aunt Josephine smiled. "I think you should do what feels right to you. Not what your mother wants, not what society expects, not even what Alessandro wants. What do you want, Beatrice?" Beatrice thought about it all day and into the night. She thought about how much she had changed since coming to Cornwall, how she had found strength she never knew she had, how she had discovered a world of ideas and beauty that no one in London had ever shown her. And she thought about Dr. Moretti, his kind eyes, his patient explanations, his respect for her thoughts and questions, the way he looked at her not as a pretty face but as a whole person. The next morning, she woke early and walked alone on the beach. The tide was coming in, waves washing away yesterday's footprints. The sun was just rising, turning the whole world gold and pink and full of promise. By the time she returned to the cottage, Beatrice had made up her mind. Dr. Moretti was coming for tea that afternoon. When he arrived, she met him in the garden where roses nodded in the soft breeze. "I've decided," she said without preamble. "I will come to London with you." His face lit up. "You will?" "Yes, but not to visit my family or rejoin society. I want to see the British Museum and the Royal Society. I want to hear your lecture. I want to see London through new eyes." Dr. Moretti took both her hands in his. "You'll see things you never saw before, even though you lived there all your life, and I'll be beside you every step of the way." Beatrice smiled, feeling lighter and freer than she ever had. "I'm not afraid anymore," she realized aloud. "Of what?" "Of anything. Of London. Of the Duke. Of what people might say or think. I know who I am now. And I like that person much better than the one I was trying to be before." Dr. Moretti's smile was as bright as the sun overhead. "So do I, Beatrice. So do I." As they walked together through the garden, hand in hand, Beatrice thought about the strange path her life had taken, how a moment of shame and humiliation had led her here, to this garden, with this man, feeling this joy. How what had seemed like the worst night of her life had actually been the beginning of something wonderful. The roses bloomed around them in every shade of pink and red. Bees hummed among the flowers. The sun shone down from a perfect blue sky. And Beatrice Ventri, once the perfect London lady in training, now a naturalist with soil under her fingernails and ideas in her head, smiled at the man beside her, and felt, for the first time, truly and completely free. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Beatrice's life. She spent her days with Dr. Moretti, walking along the shore, sitting in the garden, or reading by the fire when it rained. They talked for hours about books, stars, plants, and places he had seen in his travels. Sometimes Aunt Josephine joined them, but often she found reasons to be busy elsewhere, a small smile on her face as she left them alone. "I've received a letter from the university," Dr. Moretti told Beatrice one evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange, and the air was sweet with the smell of roses. "They want me to return to Italy in 3 weeks to begin teaching for the fall term." Beatrice felt her heart sink. She had known this day would come, but somehow she had pushed it from her mind, wanting to live in the perfect present without thinking of the future. "You must be eager to return to your work," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Moretti was quiet for a long moment. "I have been thinking about that," he said finally, "about my work and my life and what I truly want." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Beatrice, these past months have been the most wonderful of my life. I came to England seeking knowledge about coastal plants. Instead, I found something far more precious." Beatrice's heart beat faster. She looked at their hands together, his tanned and strong from years of work, hers now touched by sun, and no longer the pale, soft hands of a London lady. "I have a question to ask you," Dr. Moretti said, "but before I do, there is something I need to tell you about my life in Italy." He told her about the university where he taught, about his small house with a garden full of herbs and flowers, about the students who came to learn from him. "It's not a grand life," he said. "Not like being a duchess in England, but it's a good life full of learning and discovery." "It sounds wonderful," Beatrice whispered. "There's more," he said. "In Bologna, women are not barred from the university as they are in England. For hundreds of years, women have studied and even taught there. If you came with me—" He paused, looking into her eyes. "If you came with me as my wife, you could continue your studies, perhaps even teach one day if that's what you wanted." Beatrice could hardly believe what she was hearing. Women can study at the university? Yes. Not in all subjects, and there are still many who disapprove. But it's possible. He squeezed her hand. "Beatrice Ventri, I love your curious mind, your kind heart, and your brave spirit. Will you marry me and come to Italy, to a life very different from the one you once expected?" Beatrice thought of the life she'd almost had. The grand London house, the title of Duchess, the endless rounds of parties and social calls. Then she thought of Italy, a place she'd only read about in books, with its ancient buildings and warm sunshine. She thought about studying at a university, learning things no one in her family had ever thought a woman should know. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you and go to Italy." Dr. Moretti's face lit up with joy. He leaned forward and kissed her softly. It was nothing like the formal kisses on the hand she'd received from the Duke. This was a kiss between equals, filled with love and promise. When they told Aunt Josephine their news, she clapped her hands with delight. "I knew it. I've seen the way you two look at each other. Oh, my dear Beatrice, what an adventure you'll have." But the hardest part was still to come. Beatrice had to tell her parents. She sat at her small desk and wrote the most difficult letter of her life. "Dear Mother and Father, I have news that I hope will bring you joy, though I fear it may cause you concern. I am engaged to be married to Dr. Alessandro Moretti, a professor from the University of Bologna." The reply came faster than she expected. Her father's handwriting, not her mother's. "Your mother is too upset to write. We are coming to Cornwall at once. Expect us in 3 days." When her parents' carriage arrived at the cottage, Beatrice was waiting in the garden. Her mother stepped down first, looking around with barely hidden disgust at the simple cottage and wild garden. Her father followed, his face worried but less angry than Beatrice had feared. "Beatrice," her mother said stiffly, "you look different." "Hello, Mother, Father. Welcome to Aunt Josephine's home." Beatrice led them inside, where Aunt Josephine greeted them warmly despite the coldness of her sister's response. "Where is this Italian person you claim to be marrying?" her mother asked, sitting primly on the edge of a chair, as if afraid it might dirty her fine dress. "Dr. Moretti will join us for dinner," Beatrice said. "He's at the village today, meeting with colleagues." "Beatrice," her father said gently, "your mother and I are concerned. We know nothing about this man, and Italy is so far away." "I understand your concerns," Beatrice said, "but I've made my decision. I'm going to marry Dr. Moretti and move to Italy with him." Her mother's face hardened. "This is because of the Duke, isn't it? You're running away because you can't face London after your disgrace." Beatrice took a deep breath. "No, Mother, this isn't about the Duke at all. This is about me choosing a life that will make me happy." "Happy?" Her mother's voice rose. "What does happiness have to do with marriage? Marriage is about proper connections, about security and position. What position will you have as the wife of a foreign professor?" "I'll be a student at the University of Bologna," Beatrice said quietly. "And perhaps one day a teacher." Her mother looked as if Beatrice had slapped her. "A student? A teacher? Have you lost your mind completely? No lady of quality would ever—" "I'm not a lady of quality anymore, Mother," Beatrice interrupted. "I'm just Beatrice, and I'm choosing a different path." When Dr. Moretti arrived for dinner, Beatrice watched her parents closely. Her mother was cold and asked pointed questions about his family and income. Her father was more polite, showing interest in Dr. Moretti's work and the University of Bologna. "So women actually attend classes at your university?" her father asked, clearly surprised. "Yes, sir. It's a tradition that goes back centuries," Dr. Moretti explained. "Not in all fields, but in many. Your daughter has a remarkable mind. I believe she could excel in natural philosophy or mathematics, should she choose to study those subjects." Beatrice's mother set down her fork with a sharp clink. "This is absurd. Beatrice, I insist you return to London with us tomorrow. This has gone on long enough." Beatrice looked at her mother, seeing for the first time not the all-powerful figure of her childhood, but a woman trapped by society's rules, unable to imagine a different kind of life. "I'm not coming back to London, Mother," she said gently, "except perhaps to visit someday. My home will be in Italy with Alessandro." "Then you are no longer my daughter," her mother said, her voice shaking. "No daughter of mine would throw away everything I've worked for, everything I've taught her, to run off with a foreigner and live in shame." The room fell silent. Beatrice felt the words like a physical blow, but she sat up straight, her face calm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mother, but my decision is made." Her father reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "My dear, surely that's too harsh. Beatrice is still our daughter, regardless of her choices." "How can you take her side?" her mother demanded, "after everything we've done to secure her future?" "I'm not taking sides," her father said quietly. "I'm just not willing to lose my daughter because she chooses a different life than the one we planned." That night, Beatrice lay awake in her bed, thinking about her mother's words. The pain was sharp, but underneath it was something else. A strange sense of freedom. For her whole life she had tried to be the perfect daughter, to earn her mother's approval. Now that she no longer had it, she found she could breathe more deeply, stand more tall. In the morning, her father came to find her in the garden. "Your mother and I are returning to London today," he said. "I understand," Beatrice replied. "Will she say goodbye?" Her father shook his head sadly. "She's not ready. But I want you to know that my door is always open to you, Beatrice. And—" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This was your grandmother's. I think she would want you to have it now." Inside the pouch was a ring with a small but perfect sapphire. "Thank you, Father," Beatrice whispered, hugging him tightly. As her parents' carriage pulled away, Beatrice stood in the garden watching until it disappeared down the lane. She felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. "Are you all right?" Dr. Moretti asked, coming to stand beside her. Beatrice slipped her hand into his. "I will be," she said. "This is the hardest choice I've ever made, but I know it's the right one." Later that day, as they walked along the cliff path, they met an unexpected visitor coming toward them. Beatrice felt her heart jump when she recognized the tall figure with the proud bearing. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a small curtsy out of old habit. "This is a surprise." The Duke of Harrington looked much the same as he had at the ball 6 months ago, though perhaps a bit thinner, a bit less sure of himself. "Miss Ventri," he said with a slight bow, "I heard you are still in Cornwall, and that you have news." Beatrice realized that even here gossip travelled. "Yes, may I present Dr. Alessandro Moretti, my fiancé." "Alessandro, this is the Duke of Harrington." The two men nodded to each other, sizing each other up. "I was hoping I might speak with you privately, Miss Ventri," the Duke said. Beatrice hesitated, then nodded to Dr. Moretti, who squeezed her hand before walking a little way down the path, giving them privacy but staying within sight. "I received a letter from your mother," Duke said, once they were alone. "She seems to think I might persuade you to return to London and reconsider your options." Beatrice couldn't help but laugh. "My mother believes I'm throwing my life away to spite you." "And are you?" The Duke's blue eyes searched her face. "No," Beatrice said firmly. "My choice has nothing to do with you. It's about who I want to be, not who I want to avoid." The Duke looked out at the sea, his face thoughtful. "I behaved badly at the ball," he said after a moment. "I was angry that you had lied, but my response was ungentlemanly. I've regretted it." "Thank you for saying so," Beatrice said, surprised by his admission. "Your mother mentioned a university in Italy. Women studying alongside men. It sounds most irregular." "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "Most irregular. And wonderful." The Duke looked at her closely. "You've changed, Miss Ventri." "Yes," she said simply. "I have." "I came here to offer you another chance," he said. "To return to London as my future Duchess. To put the past behind us." 6 months ago, those words would have made Beatrice's heart soar. Now, they barely touched her. "That's very generous, Your Grace, but I must decline. My future lies elsewhere." She looked down the path where Dr. Moretti waited. His face turned toward the sea, giving them privacy. "I'm choosing a different kind of life, one with fewer balls and fine dresses, but more books and ideas and real conversations." The Duke followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. "You love him," he said, sounding slightly surprised. "Yes," Beatrice said. "I do." "Well then," the Duke said stiffly, "I wish you happy, Miss Ventri." He hesitated, then added, "He's a fortunate man to have won your heart." As the Duke walked away down the path, Beatrice felt the last tie to her old life break free. She waited until he disappeared around the bend, then went to join Dr. Moretti. "What did he want?" Dr. Moretti asked. "To offer me the life I once thought I wanted," Beatrice said. "And I found I didn't want it at all." Dr. Moretti took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Then I am the luckiest of men," he said, "for you've chosen me instead." Beatrice looked out at the vast horizon where sea met sky. "No," she said softly, "I've chosen myself, and you are the man who makes that choice possible." The wedding took place on a perfect summer day in the small stone chapel near Aunt Josephine's cottage. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the simple wooden pews with spots of blue, red, and green. Wild flowers picked that morning from the meadow decorated the altar and filled the air with sweet smells. Beatrice wore a simple white dress with no hoops or tight corset. Around her neck hung her grandmother's sapphire ring on a thin silver chain. Her hair was styled simply, with tiny white flowers woven through the curls. She carried a small bunch of cornflowers and daisies tied with a blue ribbon. "You look beautiful," Aunt Josephine said, tears in her eyes as she helped Beatrice with the last flower in her hair, and more important, "you look happy." Only 12 people attended the ceremony. There were no grand carriages lined up outside, no fine ladies in expensive dresses, no important gentlemen in fancy suits. Instead, there were Dr. Moretti's 3 colleagues from the university, Mrs. Grant from the girls' school, the kindly bookshop owner, and a few of Aunt Josephine's friends. Beatrice had sent an invitation to her parents, but only her father had come, arriving the night before with a small trunk of her belongings from London. "Your mother sends her regards," he had said, not quite meeting Beatrice's eyes. They both knew it wasn't true, but Beatrice appreciated the kindness behind the lie. As Beatrice walked down the short aisle on her father's arm, she thought about the grand wedding that might have been hers in London. The Duke's family chapel would have held 300 people. There would have been 12 bridesmaids in matching dresses. The guest list would have included earls and ladies, maybe even someone from the royal family. The gifts would have filled a room. But looking ahead at Dr. Moretti, Alessandro as she now called him, waiting for her with a smile that lit up his entire face, Beatrice knew she wouldn't trade this small, perfect moment for all the grandeur in the world. The ceremony was short and simple. They spoke their vows in clear voices that filled the small chapel. When the old village priest pronounced them husband and wife, Alessandra kissed her gently, and their small group of guests clapped and cheered. Afterward, they had a simple meal in Aunt Josephine's garden. The table was set under the apple tree, with mismatched plates and cups that didn't matter because the food was delicious and the company was wonderful. They ate fresh bread, local cheese, fish caught that morning, and vegetables from the garden. For dessert, there was a small cake made by the village baker, decorated with real flowers. "A toast," Aunt Josephine said, raising her glass, "to Beatrice and Alessandro. May your life together be as beautiful and unexpected as the way you found each other." Beatrice looked around the table at the smiling faces, her father trying hard to hide his worry, Aunt Josephine beaming with pride, Mrs. Grant raising her glass high. The bookshop owner who had supplied her with so many wonderful books. These people had seen her change, had helped her find a new path, had supported her when she chose a life so different from the one she was raised for. "Thank you all," she said, her voice catching a little, "for everything." 2 days later, Beatrice and Alessandro stood on the dock, ready to board the ship that would take them to France and from there to Italy. Aunt Josephine and Beatrice's father had come to see them off. "Write to me every week," Aunt Josephine said, hugging Beatrice tightly. "I want to hear all about the university and your new home." "I will," Beatrice promised, "and you must come visit us when we're settled." Her father looked uncomfortable but determined. "I've set aside some money for you," he said quietly. "It's not a large amount, but it should help you get started in your new home." "Thank you, Father," Beatrice said, deeply touched. "And thank you for coming to the wedding. It meant so much to me." He hugged her awkwardly. "Be happy, my dear. That's all I've ever really wanted for you." The ship's horn sounded, calling the last passengers to board. Beatrice took one final look at the English coast, the white cliffs, the green hills, the small cottage where she'd found herself. Then she took Alessandro's hand and walked up the gangplank to begin her new life. The journey took 12 days. They travelled first by ship across the Channel to France, then by coach through France and over the mountains into Italy. Beatrice watched out the window as the landscape changed. The neat fields of England gave way to the vineyards of France, and then to the rolling hills and cypress trees of Italy. "Is it like you imagined?" Alessandro asked as they neared Bologna. Beatrice shook her head. "It's better. The colours are brighter. The hills are more dramatic. Even the air smells different, like herbs and sunshine." Bologna welcomed them with warm air and golden light. The ancient city walls rose high around buildings made of red brick and warm stone. The streets were narrow, with tall buildings on either side providing cool shade. People called greetings to each other across the streets or from open windows above. Alessandro's home was a small house on a narrow street not far from the university. It had 3 floors, a kitchen and small sitting room on the ground floor, a bedroom and study on the second, and a wonderful rooftop garden with a view of the city's famous towers. The rooms were small but filled with books, maps, and interesting objects from Alessandro's travels. "It's not very grand," he said, watching Beatrice explore her new home. She ran her hand over the spines of the books that filled every shelf. She looked at the simple but beautiful furniture, the windows that let in so much light, the small garden where herbs and vegetables grew in pots. "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it. Life in Bologna was nothing like life in London. The days began early, with the sound of church bells and the calls of vendors in the street. Alessandro spent his mornings teaching at the university, while Beatrice explored her new city. She learned to shop in the market, to cook Italian food, to speak a few words of the language. In the afternoons, Alessandro took her to the university. The buildings were ancient, with stone halls that echoed with footsteps and courtyards where students and teachers gathered to talk. Beatrice sat in on Alessandro's classes, taking notes just like the students. Some people stared at her or whispered behind their hands. A foreign woman in the classroom was still unusual, but many welcomed her with smiles and curious questions. "You have a natural talent for observation," Alessandro told her one evening as they worked together in his study. "The way you notice details in plant structures, the careful notes you take, you would make an excellent scientist." "Do you really think so?" Beatrice asked. "I know so," he said. "Next term I think you should enroll officially in some classes, start your formal education." Beatrice felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a touch of fear. "But my Italian is still so poor, and I've never had proper training in science." "You'll learn," Alessandro said confidently, "and I'll help you." 6 months after their arrival in Bologna, Beatrice stood at the front of a small classroom in the university. 20 young girls between the ages of 10 and 15 sat on wooden benches, watching her with curious eyes. The headmistress of the girls' school had asked Alessandro if he would give a talk about plants to her students. Alessandro had suggested Beatrice instead. "Good morning," Beatrice said in careful Italian. "My name is Mrs. Moretti. Today we're going to learn about how plants grow from seeds." She showed them the collection of seeds she'd gathered, some as big as her thumb, others as small as a grain of sand. She explained how each seed contained everything needed to grow a new plant. She drew pictures on a slate board to show the parts of a seed and how roots and stems developed. The girls asked questions, their voices eager. How long did it take a seed to grow? Why were some seeds so much bigger than others? Could you eat all kinds of seeds? Beatrice answered each one, sometimes having to search for the right Italian words, but always finding a way to explain. At the end of the lesson, the headmistress thanked her warmly. "The girls were so engaged," she said. "Would you consider coming back next week to teach them more?" Beatrice walked home through the sunny streets of Bologna with a light step and a happy heart. She climbed the stairs to the rooftop garden where Alessandro was reading. "How did it go?" he asked, looking up from his book. "Wonderful," Beatrice said, sitting beside him. "They've asked me to come back next week, and the headmistress said if the lessons continue to go well, she might offer me a regular teaching position." Alessandro smiled and took her hand. "I'm not surprised. You're a natural teacher." Beatrice looked out over the red-tiled roofs of Bologna, the city that was becoming her home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, she could see the university where she was now a student 3 days a week, studying botany and natural history. "When I think about the girl I was a year ago," she said softly, "I hardly recognize her. She was so worried about being proper, about pleasing everyone else. She had no idea who she really was or what she really wanted." "And now?" Alessandro asked. Beatrice smiled. "Now I know. I want this. Learning, teaching, discovering. I want to use my mind, not just display my manners. I want to see things no one else has seen, understand things no one else has understood." She thought about the Duke and the life she had almost had, the grand houses, the fine clothes, the empty conversations, the rules that would have kept her small and proper and silent. She thought about her mother, still angry and hurt in London, unable to understand the choice Beatrice had made. "The night of that ball, when the Duke tried to shame me, I thought my life was over," she said. "I thought I had lost everything that mattered." "And instead?" Alessandro prompted. "Instead, I found everything that really matters," Beatrice said. "I found the courage to choose my own path. I found a place where my mind is valued more than my manners. I found work that fills me with joy, and I found you, someone who loves me not for who I was raised to be, but for who I really am." Alessandro leaned over and kissed her gently. "The finest dance of all," he said, "is the one where we become truly ourselves." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The path that had seemed like her greatest disgrace had led her to her greatest joy. The waltz that was meant to shame her had become the first step in the dance of her true life.